Good to Great. Good to Great. With Ali and Naimi. Only on Pulse 95. Pulse 95.
So sometimes you might think that whatever you have planned in your head since you were a child would be the right thing to do or the right career to pursue. But later on, as you grow older, you might realize that, oh no, that's not what I actually want to be. Well, we have a similar interesting story here today on Good to Great with an amazing person who will tell us a lovely story about how he became successful. Stay tuned on Radio Pulse 95 to listen to a story that will take you to a wonderful scenario of how one can move from being good to great.
Good to Great. Good to Great. With Ali and Naimi. Only on Pulse 95. Pulse 95.
Thank you, Mr. Ashfaq, for accepting the interview.
Thank you, Alia. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me as part of your show.
Pleasure's mine. So we'll start over with asking you a question. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, an introduction about you and what do you do?
Sure. So no, thank you, Alia, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be part of your show. I essentially come from a small town in India, north side of India called Kashmir. It's really a piece of heaven on earth. Unfortunately, been quite troubled last few decades, but that's where I was born. I turned 18 and decided to go to UK, which is where I studied my bachelor's and master's. My parents, basically, my dad was a semi-government officer. My mum taught at a college. She ended up being a principal at a college. My dad retired as an MD for a semi-government organization. So I had tough parenting, I must say. I actually recall going to school and having to come back. My dad strongly believed in academic success being a determinant for how well you do in life. So I remember when I would come back in those days, you would probably not know, but we used to have these question papers and answers that you had to write on a piece of paper. So each time I would do like an exam at school, you would come back home and your dad would make you sit for 2 hours and redo that question paper all over again. I'm like, Dad, what is this? So his logic was that if you made a mistake, you don't have to wait 3-4 weeks for the results to come and then know that there was something that you did wrong. So you should be correcting it now. Obviously, little did you know that over a period of time, I'd kind of become smart. So I would find this smartest kid in the school, make sure that I got to learn the answers on my way back from school to home and do this paper. And my dad would basically get so impressed. So I get longer time to play and get some sweets and all the, kisses and hugs. Until, of course, the results came. So they were not 100%. And my dad would be like furious and fuming at the teachers. We need to see your school teacher. I mean, you got it all right when I tried you. So what happened? And then I would come with these innovative ways of making sure that he doesn't end up going to the school or my cover is blown.
It would be embarrassing.
Absolutely. So that's how it started. Anyway, finally, I decided to, like I said, go to UK and study there. I actually remember when I first flew to London, it was my first international travel. So I ended up wearing like a 3-piece suit and a tie. And I thought I'm a kind of an avid cricket fan. So I used to watch these 5-day cricket matches. And you would see a lot of these English people come like fully dressed with their coats and ties. So I thought maybe jeans and like tees are inappropriate to travel to the UK. So yeah, quite naive back then, but that's how I was. So it's been a long journey since.
Oh, that's impressive. So how old were you when you went to the UK?
I was 18. Like I said, I never traveled outside India before.
How did that feel?
It can be overwhelming, to be honest, especially with the lack of exposure and the peer pressure, because I got to know a few people who were going to be like part of the group, and they came from well-traveled families. They were obviously much wealthier. They had access to resources that I didn't have at the time. So it did kind of feel difficult to fit in. So it really was tough.
Let's talk about the starting points to your career. So what did you do? What did you choose to do?
So, starting point of my career, well, that's actually an interesting story. Back where I come from, there were only 2 recognized professions back in Kashmir. So you could either become a doctor or you could become an engineer. And if you failed to get an admission in one of those faculties, you basically deemed a failure. So, I kind of grew up hearing that I'm going to be a doctor, Ashfaq is going to be a doctor. Over a period of time, I started believing that I wanted to be a doctor, so it became like this thrusted upon aim. Until one day, my grandma, who I dearly loved, got admitted to a hospital, so I was accompanying her, and I saw somebody brought in dead, and the stretcher was covered in this pool of blood. And it was really, really disturbing. I just couldn't get those images, those very disturbing images out of my mind. And that was a turning point. I said, being a doctor is surely not my cup of tea. So I got to do something about it. So I started having a conversation with my parents that, look, I want to study management. And as you would expect, my mom didn't talk to me for a month. Felt, how would they face the society? I mean, we spent so much on sending you to the best school. I mean, within our means, we, obviously curtailed on all the expenses to make sure that you went to a good school. And here you come, you don't want to be a doctor? Are you okay? And eventually my dad kind of reconciled and he accompanied me to see these colleges and other campuses and supported me. That basically was the start. And like I said, then I ended up going to the UK, did my bachelor's, master's, worked there for a Ministry of Justice, stayed in UK for almost 8 years, came to Dubai in 2006. Obviously everything about Dubai is impressive, so it doesn't really take you very long to fall in absolute love with the city. So rest is history. I've been here working for Mashreq Bank ever since. Today I manage human resources for our retail bank.
It's very interesting, though. I want to touch upon the question, when you were 18 years old and you left your country and your family and your parents, and ever since you've been living alone, how did that feel? I really want to understand your feeling in that regards. And was it difficult to become successful being alone and away from your family?
It always is, and like I said, I mean, with the background that I just explained, it really was overwhelming at some point to just be there. And I remember when we first flew into the UK and we were settling, and just fitting in was very difficult. Not so much for some of the others who had that exposure, but I just wanted to be like them. And so, everything was kind of a challenge. You almost felt that, which is wrong, which I realize now, but you felt like you're not sure. You started having some self-doubt about yourself. You started, even when I started my first job and I was still on my own, I started developing this imposter syndrome. Like, look, I mean, am I really worth whatever I get paid, as an example, because there are so many others who probably are better qualified and whatever else. But eventually, obviously, you start learning to deal with it, and I think I had a kind of a structured response to what I was going through initially. I realized that I had glossophobia too, which is fear of public speaking. My communication skills were pretty average back then. I didn't have family or as many friends back then, so it was a bit difficult. And then you kind of learn how to address those fears. You start to understand that a lot depends on how you describe your maybe early failures and successes, and if you convince yourself that some of the failures are probably because of certain things that you actually can control, you don't give up easily. So you kind of fought that initial solitude, you got in the company of people you wanted to be, you kind of added a certain value to kind of feel belonging as part of that group, and things got better.
So we can call the fears that you've faced as challenges. What sort of challenges that you've faced? I'm sure that being away from your family was a challenge. It is considered a challenge. and being in another country, living alone, that's a challenge. What other challenges did you face?
I think, to be honest, it wasn't something that I came from a completely unprivileged, kind of a environment. Much of it was what I actually spoke about. It was probably just that not having that enough exposure, which obviously didn't help initially. Challenges back then, I think the biggest was, I know UK is very cosmopolitan and London's a lot more than that. You know, fortunately or unfortunately, you still got profile as an Asian living in a Western world, and it has its implications. But I must give a lot of credit to how it was being managed in the UK. I know there's a lot of bad press talking about how people get profiled and stuff. I remember this example, when there was some heightened alert because of some unfortunate incidents that happened. So I was at a train station and it was quite late in the night, and there was hardly anybody else on the platform except me, like an Asian looking guy with a rucksack, and a very indigenous English looking white couple, again very young, basically in their shorts and tees and carrying nothing, while I still had my jacket and the rucksack. And I see two policemen walking with like the sniffing dog. And what was remarkable is, while I knew that they really wanted to kind of sniff me out, they didn't approach me, and they went to this couple first to desensitize the entire thing. And I know that was a bit of a drama, and essentially they were going to come to me, but the way they did it actually made you feel actually much happier than you would have been otherwise. You knew that you somehow are still being profiled, but the sensitivity with which it was dealt with was amazing. So that stayed with me. But apart from that, there were still issues that you face from time to time, which are unfortunate, which happen in any part of the world, right? But that was probably one of those major challenges, I would say, of having this feeling of being discriminated, even though the system there tried its best
not to show it. Alright, so going on a quick break, we're going to come back with Mr. Ashfaq Bandey to ask him about the mistakes that he's done and the support he received from his family and how he managed his journey to success.
Good to Great. Good to Great. With Ali Naimi. Only on Pulse 95. Pulse 95.
Mr. Ashfaq, so you've mentioned that your father wanted you to become a doctor, and then you didn't want to, even though it was programmed and you thought that you will be a doctor, definitely. Do you consider that as a mistake now, since you haven't become a doctor and all your plans have changed? Do you consider this as a mistake?
Oh, not at all. In fact, I think, I am so grateful that, my parents eventually understood and supported me, because, if there's one thing that I would actually tell the youngsters even today, is when you look at choosing a career, a lot of our parents or yourself as an individual look at industries and industry outlooks and your earning potential in that industry, the socio-economic status that you could have by being part of that path, is not necessarily something that's always going to lead you to be very successful at it. You, in my mind, should follow your heart. You know yourself best. You got to influence those who are going to be stakeholders in the process to help you choose the right career, and decide what you're really passionate about and what you really can do. You know your limits, you know what you're capable of better than anybody else. So, if you choose, irrespective of whatever industry it is, and that's something that's not going to look like a chore, and it's going to be something that's going to be driven by passion, you are going to succeed. And I think I'm a good example of that. I think I would have have really sucked to be a doctor. I would have to actually have somebody treating me all the time, every time I saw a casualty. But I don't know if I told you, and it's a funny thing, my parents obviously eventually reconciled by getting me married to a doctor. So my wife is a doctor.
That's
and
nice.
Probably one of my bigger mistakes is, after I got into the career path that I wanted to be, my stakes were high in terms of wanting to prove that I'm going to do well, especially with upsetting everybody in the family. So I, in the initial good few years, worked regularly 13-14 hours a day, and that did obviously take a toll on my family work-life balance. Surely my wife felt ignored too. And I think she's taken a perfect revenge. She now works in the UK, so we get to meet like whenever she obviously gets a break. But jokes aside, no, it actually is a mistake if you don't know how to balance things a bit. It's gonna take a toll. So you gotta smell the roses on the way and take care of people who have been there and supported you all along. So, yeah.
Very nice to hear now. So, talking about the support, as you've also mentioned that your mother did not talk to you for an entire month because you did not want to become a doctor, and that's what she wanted, and your father did. So, in terms of support, after when your parents reconciled and then they thought, no, it's the time for Ashfaq to choose his career path and what he wants to do. Let's talk about their support. How supportive were they?
They were quite supportive, to be honest, eventually. I mean, at the end of the day, it's like you've got just this one son who now has decided to go completely astray in their minds.
You're one son, so you're the only son.
Yeah.
That's why they were pressuring.
So, of course. So no, eventually, obviously, they did everything that they could as a parent. They paid for my, obviously, tuitions. Back in the UK, obviously, it's a big deal. You would know that, parents there, it's just how people were raised. They turn 18 and they're pretty much on their own. So my friends found it quite surprising that my parents were still paying for my college tuition. So I met a friend who said, and he was a Brit, obviously, he said, I've got a lot of debts to pay. I'm like, how? And do banks give you so much loan that you have so much debts? We're just starting, right? He's like, no, but I pay my mom so much in installments and my dad so much in installments. They paid for my lodging and schooling and stuff. So I found it.
You were quite surprised.
The kind of culture we come from, our parents pretty much take care of us
Pay
until
up
you're
everything,
married,
yeah,
right?
they pay up everything.
And many a times, even after you're married, they actually take care of the expenses of your wife and you until you're settled. So it was a bit strange, but no. Going back to the point, they were obviously very, very supportive. They've supported me all the way through.
Absolutely. We're quite pampered, aren't we?
Yeah, in that fashion we are. We're lucky.
All right, so then let's talk about your enemies. I'm sure you had enemies along the way, or people who wanted to stop you from being successful. So whom were your enemies?
That's a difficult one. Not really, actually. When I genuinely think about it, I think the enemy I see or did see at some point was my own self. I talked briefly about it initially when I started, how I started self-doubting myself. I would be very emotional about things. I felt, anybody who probably for right reasons would say something and maybe, it was something for your good, I just couldn't probably handle it. I ended up being a bit self-deprecating at times. I did tell you about this imposter syndrome I started to feel. So it was all these strange things, and all of it would butt out from that self-doubt. So I think your biggest enemy is yourself, because it can be quite limiting. And that's when I started reading stuff like the inspiration that I would get from reading certain books or some TED Talks and stuff. But it is really down to you. You always have an option to choose whether to respond negatively or positively to any situation. And fortunately for me, I've started to learn how to react to things in a more positive way. I've become more of an optimist.
All right, so moving to another break, we will be back with Mr. Ashfaq Bandey to learn what piece of advice that he would like to give us here on Get to Great that would help us learn to be successful and manage to pursue our dreams.
Good to Great. Good to Great. With Ali Naimi. Only on Pulse 95. Pulse 95.
All right, so Mr. Ashfaq, I'm sure there are people that have inspired you and people that you admire. Can you tell us about the people that you admire and why do you admire them?
I think one of the people that I really admired a lot over the last few years is a guy called Nick Vujicic. I don't know if you've heard of the guy. He's a guy who's kind of born without arms and legs. You must have seen a lot of his videos and stuff, and how he struggled, dealing with humiliation and trying to find why was he even born, and to being like one of those very, very successful people and achieving and doing things that even able people aren't able to do. There's a book that he's actually written, Life Without Limits, and that's actually for me been truly inspiring, which kind of tells you, it actually gets you really emotional the way he talks about his personal life and how he had to deal with it, and leaves you with tons and tons of inspiration of how he actually overcame every challenge that even normal beings like us wouldn't even be able to actually do. So that's to me terrific. So a fan for life, really.
You've become very successful at a very young age. What were your, let's say, secret ingredient to your success, or what was the successful daily habit or routine that you do that caused you to be that successful?
To be very honest, I'm not much of a routines guy. I do take life a day at a time. I don't worry too much about things that are beyond your control, and I try and focus on things that you can control, But there are a few things I do still do every day. Like I do take care of my physical fitness, as an example, which makes me feel refreshed every day. I have certain habits around things that I would want to read about. I've learned how to be kind of grateful each day, so I would look back at the day and have those internal discussions or dialogues to say, okay, this went well and that went well, and be thankful for it. So I consciously try and make myself more self-aware, and in a process kind of it helps you to boost your EQ in a bit, which obviously goes a long way. I think you become more successful in managing your social relationships, your relationships at work, so on and so forth. So yeah, those are probably some of those things that I do consciously every day.
And you feel that they're making you successful and they've led to your success?
I think a large part of that, although I must say that obviously a lot of people think the brightest are the ones that will obviously have the best careers in life, right? So essentially saying that people with the highest IQs are more likely to be more successful. But if you actually go by the studies, if you have a high emotional quotient, you're more likely to do well, and that's actually been proven by multiple studies. And that's something that I've always been very conscious about. Starting with being very, very self-aware, starting being more grateful for what you have, I think is a recipe that I've actually found has actually made me as successful as I am today.
That's very nice to hear. All right, so in terms of your favorite movies, sports, music, and hobbies, lots of questions in one question. We'd like to know, what are your favorite movies, sports, hobbies? You've mentioned cricket.
Yeah. So I like one of the movies that I've watched a few times. I don't actually end up watching movies too often, to be honest. But
are you too busy? Too busy to watch movies?
No, I don't. I think you can always find time, but I try and spend more time on physical activities than actually watching stuff, and that's always been the case. I'm like more of an outdoor person. But Pursuit of Happiness would be like one that comes on top of my mind. Will Smith did a phenomenal job. Very inspirational of how
absolutely I agree
he struggles, and as a single parent having to take care of a child and trying his job in a brokerage firm and that journey. I think it's been beautifully portrayed, and he's done a phenomenal job. It kind of warms your heart at the end of it. And I don't like any of the movies with sad endings.
Most of them do have sad
I know,
endings.
and I purposely avoid those. I think you go through a lot of grief in the real world
Already,
and
so
you shouldn't actually
you
have
can't
to
take more.
pay for going through more. So
Absolutely, yeah.
that's just my mantra. I would actually
That's-
read reviews and make sure that somebody has watched it and says no, it kind of leaves you all happy at the end. Otherwise, I'm not going to pay.
Absolutely. All right, so Mr. Ashfaq, we're coming to an end, so we'd like to ask you if you've got any kind of advice that you would like to give to youngsters or people who are seeking careers or first jobs and they're starting their careers. Any kind of advice that you would like to give?
Yeah, sure. Probably I would say if I could summarize it in 3 big things or themes. The first and foremost would be if you are obviously a youngster, just freshly graduated, and you're just wanting to enter a job market, you of course have the LinkedIn and likes and the social ways to connect over, your PC or your apps. But my advice is don't forget the human connection. Make sure that you can actually leverage the human element. I was talking to one of my dear friends at work, someone called Julius. He was telling me how he was having this conversation with his 2 boys who've graduated, and they were talking about these dating apps, right? So it's like, as a father, I just don't understand, how do you even know you're talking to real people? It's so fake. So in dating apps and stuff, you end up meeting people who are nothing similar to what they might have actually created as a persona on these apps, right?
Yeah.
So it's much similar to a lot of recruiters and assessors. So you create a profile and you try and connect to them. You may feel that's a great way to connect, but in reality, and unfortunately, not everybody is connected in the same way as you are into your world. So again, the same guy was telling me how his younger son ended up getting a job. So after going through numerous applications and applying through LinkedIn and likes, the 2 jobs he ended up getting is one where his older brother was best friends with the guy who was going to be his manager, and the second job that he got was through someone who used to be a high school buddy of, again, his older brother. So it's as simple as somebody saying, oh, you've interviewed this guy, I know his brother, he's a great kid. And that just, kind of helps you stand out a little bit, right? And so it is phenomenally important that you don't just focus on just being behind a screen and applying and stuff, but build on your network, get to know people, as many as possible, leverage your family, your friend networks, and whatever you may have. So that's one. The second, I would say, is if you look at today, like everybody, like all these bright kids come out with great grades. They play a few musical instruments. They've done some philanthropical work. They've, they play some sort of sports. They speak a few languages. So essentially everybody is like a linguist, a sportsman, a musician, got good grades. So how do you tell them apart? So what is really critical is it's not what you've done and what you've learned, but it is about what you've done with what you've learned. And if you actually can demonstrate how what you've done could impact or impact the results that you could drive in a certain organization, that's going to be powerful. So actually demonstrating to whoever you're meeting in an organization and taking them through whatever you've actually learned, you're gonna probably get your first job if you're able to do that. Finally, so I used to work for this guy, great guy. He used to head a retail bank, somebody called Subrata Som, and he would often say that, back in my days, we used to do X, and we got better at doing X, and better at doing X, and better at doing X, and I ended up doing X. But today's world, with the way everything changes, you can't afford to do that. What you learn, what you probably know today is going to be redundant tomorrow. So you got to be open to that change. And he used to stress, if you don't embrace change, then you will get changed, and you don't want to do that. So in a sense, the biggest competency today, or the most sought after competency today, is learning agility. So as youngsters, don't think like you're just entering the work stream and equipped with all the new programming languages and everything. But that's not what organizations are only going to see. You've got to demonstrate the agility in terms of learning, because tomorrow, they may know today what they're seeking, but in 5 years, who knows what they may actually need. So they're gonna hire for learning agility, they're gonna hire for attitude, and you gotta kind of demonstrate plenty of that. And yeah, that's probably what I would want to leave you with.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ashfaq. That was so interesting. Thank you for the interesting talk.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you, pleasure's mine. Mr. Ashfaq Bandey, Senior Vice President and Senior HR Business Partner of Mashreq Bank in Dubai, has been with us here today on Good to Great, and he told us a lot of interesting talk that took us on a journey with him since his childhood to what he is now. Do not forget to text us on 4215 to let us know what do you think of his story and what have you learned so far. We will surely be meeting next week on Sunday 4 p.m. again on Good to Great here on Radio Pulse 95.